Pickett. My guest is Dr. William Dement, a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine and chief of the Stanford University Division of Sleep. Dr. Dement has been studying all aspects of sleep for more than 50 years and has been a pioneer in discovering information about rapid eye movement, sleep apnea, narcolepsy, and many other aspects of sleep. Dr. Dement joins us today by phone from the Stanford campus to talk about teenagers, their sleep needs, and the repercussions when they don't get enough sleep. Dr. Dement, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about the sleep needs of teenagers and what we know about that?
Well, I think we know a great deal. There are several investigators, including myself, who've been studying this, and in general, I would say teenagers don't get, they tend to not get the sleep they need.
Are there any statistics about how many hours in general teenagers...
Well, we say 9 hours and 20 minutes. Some people would say 9 hours and 30 minutes. There are individual differences. I wouldn't say they're huge, but they exist. The main thing would be, how are teenagers functioning during the day in school, in class, and so on.
So to know whether they are getting enough sleep, we need to look at how they are performing during the day.
Correct. And I was involved in a White House conference, I think it was about a decade ago, and there were a number of high school teachers who testified, and one of them said, I teach math in a first period class, and she said, all I can do is calisthenics. Because if they sit down, they fall asleep.
So when they're falling asleep in class, obviously we know they're not getting enough sleep at night.
That's right.
And besides the fact that they're sleepy and they're not as alert, are there any psychological, academic consequences to not getting enough sleep?
Well, I think they're impaired, in a sense. They can't function as well. They can't do complex problems as well. We are accumulating evidence that even athletic performance is impaired. And it's not so much sleep each night as we now know that sleep loss accumulates. So you have what we call at least a sleep debt. And it be very much like a credit card or bank account. You have to pay it back. And the final thing that really gets in the way here is that the biological clock that exists in the brain of every single teenager, every single human being, starts to run late as you get into the teenage years, so that the alerting effect occurs. It can occur at midnight even. So a teenager goes to bed, they can't fall asleep.
So what the alerting effect? What is the alerting effect?
Well, the biological clock, which is a cluster of neurons in the base of the brain, through a system that is a system of neurons that goes all through the brain, has a neurotransmitter whose function is to alert the brain and keep the brain awake, keep the person awake. And so most teenagers, if you say, when are you most alert, they'll say, in the evening, after dinner.
So there really is a physiological reason why teenagers like to be up later at night.
Absolutely.
And many high schools start their day pretty darn early.
Yeah. I don't know. There's been a lot of effort to have schools start later, particularly high schools, and people talk about the late-to-school movement, but I don't think it's really caught on, and it's not widespread. But Stanford University now does not have any laboratories or classes before 9 a.m., which is good. Because in the old days, they used to start at 7 a.m. in some cases. And college students are, the same as high school students for all intents and purposes in terms of being alert in the evening and having trouble getting up in the morning.
So when teenagers are sleeping late on the weekends, as they often do, this is a good thing because are they paying back that sleep debt?
Well, I feel yes, very strongly, absolutely. And I know there's a certain amount of concern. Oh dear, we're changing the schedule. They're going to sleep late, and that will on Monday morning they'll have more trouble getting up. But that doesn't seem to be the case. There's no strong evidence supporting that, but there's strong evidence supporting that the more you lower your sleep debt, the better it is.
So let them sleep in as late as they want on a weekend.
Yes.
Have you looked at have you done any research on the academic consequences of not getting enough sleep? So studying how students who are sleep deprived do on exams and tests?
Well, the whole issue of grading, we've tried to do something about that, but it's so complicated that to set up a research study in the public school system is a nightmare. I mean, it can't be done. But there's plenty of evidence, from research laboratories trying to duplicate the kinds of things you would do academically. That yes, you are very impaired, and that yes, performance improves if you lower your sleep debt.
So it just occurs to me that the big college entrance exam, or one of them, the SAT, they start that test at 8 in the morning. This is not an ideal time for them to be starting that for those students who are taking the test to perform at their highest level.
Right. No, I don't think we know that people are impaired. We know that extra sleep leads to improvements in almost everything: mood, intellectual performance, athletic performance, and so on. But I think that in general, being sleep deprived, having a sleep debt is the norm, so that someone who doesn't have a sleep debt and is performing is kind of an exception.
So when they're taking those college entrance exams, I guess everybody is adjusted for being the scores are all adjusted for everyone being sleep deprived.
I mean, that could be the case. I mean, I think it's quite phenomenal that you have let's say a swimmer who has a personal best time for a sprint, and if you then get extra sleep, that personal best will improve. And that seems miraculous to an individual who's struggled to improve over a period of time.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that teenagers in general need about 9 hours and 20 minutes of sleep per night.
Yeah, that's what we estimate. The way it's very cumbersome to determine how much sleep someone needs. And what you must do is establish some kind of baseline performance in the daytime, and then with a certain amount of sleep, if it's the sleep that person needs, then that performance should not change because you're not getting more alert and you're not getting more sleepy. And so we've done that with a small series of individuals, and with that relatively small series, and I have no reason to believe that that would be exceptional. It runs over 9 hours.
If we look at a bell curve, what are sort of the standard? Is there a minimum amount of sleep that the majority of 80% of the people need, like 6 hours, or is the minimum more 8 hours to 10 hours?
Again, I think that a lot of this has been done by survey. You ask someone, how much sleep do you need? And they say, oh, I need 7 hours. I mean, that isn't necessarily true. And it is just incredibly labor-intensive to actually measure, the sleep need of an individual. I mean, you could do a survey over time. Every morning you get up and say, how do I feel? But to really know is very difficult. And it can be done, and it's pretty straightforward, but it's just so labor-intensive that large numbers have not been accumulated.
So for any particular individual who wanted to see whether sleeping more helps their performance, all they really have to do is sort of a controlled experiment on themselves, get a little more sleep every night, and see how that they feel during the day?
Correct. And then if you actually had a zero, I mean, this again is based mainly on animal research, but if you have a zero sleep debt, which is in a sense impossible because the tendency to sleep builds up during your waking period. But if you get close to zero, then you cannot get extra sleep. And in fact, when this is sort of a project I do in my class. I have a very large class of undergraduates at Stanford that, we say exhort them to get extra sleep, and then there will always be a few students who suddenly have insomnia, and it kind of scares them because they haven't had insomnia ever. And then in that case I say, you're getting close to a zero sleep debt, and that means that any disturbance now has the power to keep you awake. And if you don't fall asleep immediately, you become, oh my God, what's happening? and that worry and anxiety then is the stimulus and disturbance that prevents sleep from occurring. Now, when someone comes and says, "I couldn't sleep all night. What have you done to me?" I say, just only sleep go to bed 4 hours tonight, and you'll be fine for the rest after that.
It's hard to imagine any undergraduates in any college around the country not having any sleep debt.
Right. No, I would say, I have students for a whole quarter. It's sort of like creating a belief system. And, we present evidence, and I think they finally believe it. But this is only at Stanford, and very few other places. In fact, there's another sort of image of the triumvirate of health, that is good nutrition, physical fitness, and sound, healthy sleep. And the latter is really, really neglected. So I would say relatively few people are really achieving the sleep they need each night. It's really quite amazing. I have a huge amount of experience in this area. Sometimes a student will fall asleep in class, and you can actually stand next to them and shout, "Wake up," and nothing happens. Obviously, sooner or later, if you jostle them or shout over and over, they will wake up. But I can remember one time a student had fallen asleep in class, and in my class, there are, usually more than 500 students, and the students, when someone falls asleep, this has become traditional, they point. So I'll suddenly notice a circle of pointing fingers, and at the center, the bullseye is a sound asleep student. And then sometimes you walk up and say, "Wake up!" and they don't wake up. And one time I thought, oh my goodness, this student may be deaf, and that's unfair and embarrassing. But she finally woke up and was, just very sleepy.
Woke up to great embarrassment, I assume?
Well, I give bonus points when I do that. Yeah, so they get bonus points toward a good grade, and that counteracts the embarrassment.
If they fall asleep in your class, they get bonus points.
Well, if I wake them up, they get bonus points. I'm sure that students fall asleep, but I don't notice, or other students don't notice. They might be in the back row or something. But yes, I'm known as the person who gives bonus points for falling asleep in class.
Probably the only class in the United States where that can happen.
I think so. Well, it's just so dramatic that when you lower your sleep debt, things get better that you couldn't possibly believe would get better. And I think it's the most dramatic in athletic performance, because if you're going to say run a 100-yard dash or swim a sprint, that's what you're doing, and you can struggle to make it faster, but you can't, and then by lowering your sleep debt, suddenly there is an improvement, and that most people respond to that. It's like a miracle, and in some ways, I didn't want this to be widely known because I'm actually working with Stanford athletes, and we want to win lots of championships before everyone else figures it out.
So do the athletes have to go to bed at a certain time?
Well, the coaches, I think the current, there are many coaches in a major university, do many sports, and the coaches basically don't have any of this knowledge. So they will say, okay, you got to get up at 5 a.m. Like say when football players come early before classes start, and they put them on a schedule that is bound to sleep deprive them. Many times in many high schools around the Bay Area, at least, I know they start swimming at 5 a.m. That's just so counterproductive. It's almost like if you're going to be a swimmer, you're going to fail academically because you get so little sleep.
And for those students who are not athletes, getting enough sleep is going to help their mood and their outlook? Yes.
And it is not, like some people say, you mean I have to sleep 10 hours every night? No, you have to lower your sleep debt, and everyone, but it's sort of a cumbersome approach, but it would be good for every single person to determine how much sleep they need as their individual requirement at least once. in these years, and maybe after a couple of decades, the sleep need does gradually decrease a little bit. Not a lot, but some. That would be great for everybody. And then things like falling asleep while you're driving, making mistakes, et cetera, wouldn't happen.
Now, the sleep debt that you're talking about, is that you said you don't necessarily need 9 or 10 hours every night. Is it over the course of a week or over the course of a month? It seems too extreme.
Well,
you can't sleep for an entire
well,
week.
I mean, no. If you were a person who needed 8 hours of sleep, in terms of the way you feel in the daytime, you have determined that if you spend 8 hours in bed asleep, you feel pretty good in the daytime. And if you're doing that every night over the course of a week or two, you feel the same way. You say, okay, I have this little wave of drowsiness after lunch, but it goes away. It doesn't get worse. It doesn't get better. And you're sort of chugging along at sleeping the amount you need, and you can make it a little better or a lot better depending upon the size of your sleep debt. I would say there is some point at which you cannot avoid falling asleep if you're doing some sedentary activity. Again, there's not a lot of evidence, not a lot of studies that would determine that amount, but I'd say as the sleep debt gets up to about 50 hours, you start to really have a problem.
But it would require several nights in a row of missing a lot of sleep to get to that point, I would imagine.
Well, it accumulates over time. I mean, you could say losing an hour every night for a month.
So it does.
We have no evidence that it goes away, but no one has studied it for over a year or 2 years, but certainly over a period of weeks. I think we can make this statement with confidence.
So the bottom line is get enough sleep.
Oh yeah, and you want to be wide awake and alert all day if possible. I mean, that's the way to live, not like a zombie.
Dr. William Dement of Stanford University, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're very welcome. I'm very pleased to do this.
I'm Beth Pickett, and you're listening to Countdown to College. We'll be right back with more information and advice for the college-bound after this break.